On a mission, medical care in rural Kenya. In 2010, I took my first of 4 medical missions to Keumbu, a small town near Lake Victoria in western Kenya. The hospital sat up on a hill above the town. It had open windows with no running water. There were 2 wings. The upper one held the inpatients and the obstetrical suite. The hospital had 3 wards, each with 10 World War II surplus stretchers. There was 1 each for male and female adults, and 1 pediatric ward. This was the hospital's midwife. We delivered about 4 babies a day. This is one I delivered. The cap she's wearing was one of a dozen I brought on my mission trip, knitted and donated by a Mississippian. The other wing held the outpatient clinics. The 2 clinicians and I would see about 100 patients a day. The patients would line up early in the morning and stay until late evening to be seen. Because there was no running water, the clinicians never touched the patients. We'd ask what was wrong, and then choose one of the 20 available tests to order. Like this boy, 2 out of 3 patients had malaria. According to UNICEF, in 2021, there were 250 million malaria cases globally, leading to over 600,000 deaths. If the patients were very sick or very young, we'd admit them for IV quinine. If they were not too ill, we'd dispense a 3-day pack of lumefantrine, which cures malaria. Malaria is caused by mosquito bites. Because the wards were open-windowed, patients were being reinfected while they were being treated. The hospital was government-owned, a public facility considered a level 3 out of 5. The line on the bottom, Huduma Bora ni Haki Yako, is Swahili for don't offer bribes and don't accept them. Most services were free. A Kenya shilling is worth about a penny. One of the reasons the clinicians did not touch their patients was that a glove cost 10 shillings, which was more than most patients could afford. The patients used this outhouse. Can you imagine having a diarrhea disease and having to drag yourself out to the outhouse every hour or 2 in the middle of the night? One of the more interesting departments was the pharmacy. The most commonly dispensed medicines for children were acetaminophen and amoxicillin. Both came in pink liquid. Patients supplied their own bottles. Note the array of bottle tops. And the 2 were kept right next to each other. I wondered how many times the wrong medicine was given out. We had 3 choices of IV antibiotics for the inpatients. If we ran out of our month's supply before the end of the month, the patient's family had to go buy the drug at a local pharmacy. The medical records for the 40,000 patients the hospital served were kept in stacks on shelves and piled on the floor. Even though no one had a government ID number and all the names started with K, L, M, N, or O, the clerks could always find the needed chart. This is Jackie, the lab tech. On my second visit, I brought her my old medical school microscope as a gift. She was delighted, because it didn't need electricity, which often went out. The laboratory had a small selection of tests and very few machines. Here the clinician is doing a reagent test by hand. Here's the cook and his kitchen. Imagine preparing meals for 40 inpatients and staff with these facilities. He grew his own vegetables out back. I preferred eating out. The hospital's ambulance had broken down a few years before, so they built around it, leaving it as an art piece. Here's the laundry room. It used rainwater to wash, sunshine to dry, and then, stacked and stored, the sheets were ready to use. I saw many interesting patients. I think this woman may have had leprosy, judging by the rash and shortened toes, although I also considered trench foot or scrub typhus. This fellow had TB. He coughed frequently, spreading his bug to the other patients in his ward and to the staff. Here's one with acute asthma, on top of emphysema. The only medicines we had were old-time theophylline and adrenaline. They worked, and after 2 hours of treatment, he was discharged. This fellow has just been diagnosed with cancer. He can look at the stretcher next to him and know what his fate will soon be. Here's an AIDS patient with thrush. Because most people used fires for cooking, burns were common, such as in this toddler. We didn't have any creams to apply, they were too expensive. This patient has a gouty knee. Here's a fellow with an abscess I drained. Here's the rash of secondary syphilis. This fellow came in comatose. He received IV fluids, and after 3 days woke up and left. He was never diagnosed, although I suspect he had sleeping sickness from a tsetse fly bite. This patient had diabetic ketoacidosis and eventually died despite treatment. I diagnosed venous thrombosis in this patient. We didn't have any blood thinners such as heparin or Coumadin. We sent him home on an aspirin a day. Sometimes I did surgery. This fellow's wife smacked him with a machete. This fellow fell from his motorcycle, splitting his knee open. I spent almost 3 hours cleaning and repairing his wound, applying 24 sutures, and teaching one of the clinicians as I went. I asked the head clinician, if I hadn't been here, who would have fixed this? She said, nobody. He probably would have gotten infected and died. The most pressing need of the hospital was running water. During the year between my first and second trips, I raised money to put in a water supply by writing, publishing, and selling a children's book based on my safari pictures. I also obtained funds from the Edgewater Sunrisers Rotary Club. On my return to the Keumbu Hospital, I hired a contractor, a professor of engineering at a nearby university. We bought all new gutters at Mr. Patel's supply house in the big city. With these installed, the hospital could collect rainwater, and we cleaned out the cistern to store it. We put in a pump, added electricity, and built a water tower. We replaced all the toilets and the broken sinks. After 3 weeks of work, we had running water. Afterwards, the hospital threw a big party. And I planted a tree. When I returned 2 years later, the tree had grown 10 feet tall. On that visit in 2014, I found that the hospital had built a surgical suite. Unfortunately, they had neither a surgeon nor anesthesiologist to run it. Let me finish with a quote from the back of my book. Ask a missionary why he gives up so much to spend his time and money to help others. Likely, he'll get a dreamy look in his eyes as he remembers the faces of the grateful people he helped. He'll smile, shrug, and say, I gained more than I gave. This is Dr. Philip Levin with Doctor's Dreams videos. Please subscribe.